Hello, my name's Jack. Welcome to my cupboard. This is my favourite place in the world to read. Sometimes I sit in here and I imagine that I'm in a cabin on a big sailing ship or something like that. There's a few things in here I think you might like. This is a conch shell. Ever seen one of those before? Apparently, if you listen inside, you can hear the sea. Do you want to try? Hear anything? Wait, there's something else in here. Captain's logbook. Shall we see what's inside? Looks like there's a story in here. Let's see. It's called Saving Bindi by Susmita Bhattacharya. Shall we read it? Are you ready? Let's start. It was a typically warm day. The air was still and the water calm. The steamship bobbed on the river. Tiny waves lapped onto its sides. Trevor leaned on the wheelhouse window and pressed his nose to the cool glass. They looked like little black ants scurrying up and down to hide their food, he said, watching men with gunny sacks over their shoulders, scurrying up and down the main deck, hauling and then lowering the sacks into the holds. Jane didn't even look up. Her eyes were glued to The Surgeon's Mate, a medical book for ship surgeons. She grimaced at a particularly gruesome disease. "Father," Jane said, "we need to eat more lemons. We don't want to end up having scurvy." Captain Ridgely smiled. "I assure you we won't get any scurvy here. We eat fresh food every day." Jane didn't look so convinced. They had spent 2 whole days on board and hadn't eaten a single lemon. Vitamin C in any form is good. We eat bananas, potatoes and carrots. They all have plenty of vitamins, he added. "When will we set sail, Father?" Trevor asked. He was quite excited, but also nervous. He had heard many tales of the River Hooghly. Their father worked for the East India Company, and the steamship he commanded, SS Victoria, in honour of the reigning queen, transported sugarcane grown in the lush fields of Bengal all the way to Bombay, where it was loaded onto a bigger vessel bound for England. The sun was high up, giving out a white haze that made the distance shiver. Kites circled the sky, calling out shrilly. The river was murky brown, the dredger having loosened the mud from the bottom. Trevor could see the docks on the right. There was intense movement and a perpetual hum of the levers and cranes heaving, bullock carts creaking, the coolies shouting, the crows cawing and scratching at fish bones. "We shall sail in the next hour." Captain Ridgely looked at his pocket watch and replied, "Now you two, go down to your cabin and do some reading." Jane led the way down. Trevor did not like the narrow and dark stairwells and alleyways. They seemed to close down on him, making him breathless. The doctor had said the sea air would be good for his weak lungs, and so Mother had sent them to sail with their father in the summer holidays. They reached the deck where their cabin was, but Jane carried on down. "Where are you going, Jane?" Trevor hesitated on the landing. "Oh, Trevor, don't be such a damp squib. Who wants to read? Let's go and explore the place," Jane said. "Do what?" Trevor hesitated. Come on, Trevor, Jane hissed. Let's go to the deck. He followed her, dragging his feet. They stopped by a heavy wooden door and leaned on the handle with all their weight until it creaked open. The air was shredded with dust and jute husks from the gunny sacks. Trevor sneezed, and so did Jane. They looked at the scene through watery eyes. Imagine, Trevor, Jane whispered. We're going to have an amazing adventure sailing around India. Bet no one from school has done that. Robbie has, Trevor pointed out. His father's in charge of a tugboat. He tells us all kinds of stories. Stories. Fibs. Bet he never stepped out of his cabin. We're going to have better stories to tell. Come on. Jane pulled Trevor forward by the forecastle. Father will be very upset, trembled Trevor. He might punish us. Don't be silly, Trev. He has far more important work to do than look around for us. Look here. The anchor's lowered down from here. Stick your head out and see. They leaned out from the front of the ship and watched the anchor chain move as the steamship swayed. Trevor looked at his sister. Even though her hair was in curls and she had a pretty flush on her cheeks, she did not behave like a girl. Mother always worried about her. She didn't want to learn embroidery or baking. She refused to darn her socks. She could carve beautiful animal figures out of driftwood and could fly a kite to the envy of many boys. Trevor wished he could be like her. Perhaps then Father would treat him like a man, rather than the delicate boy he actually was. They sat down and sucked on gumdrops that Trevor discovered in his pocket. We're going to sail to Diamond Harbour and stay the night there. Tomorrow we'll be out in the Bay of Bengal, Jane announced. She'd been keeping very up to date with everything. They watched the activities in the dock. Suddenly, Trevor felt something cold and wet on his knee. He jumped and saw a small dog panting and looking straight up at him. Its ribs were sticking out. Look, Jane, a dog, Trevor gasped. Jane let out a low whistle. He sure is. Oh, what do we do, Jane? Trevor asked. He looks hungry. The dog whined and licked Trevor's knee again. He had the most beautiful brown eyes and long floppy ears. His tail was invisible because he was wagging it so hard. I have just the thing, smiled Jane, and put her hands in her skirt pockets. She produced 2 boiled eggs and a hunk of bread. You didn't take that from the breakfast table this morning, did you? Trevor whispered. I thought we might need it for later. Considering we'd go off exploring and all that, well, it's come in handy now. She offered it to the dog, which he gratefully wolfed down. He was rather hungry, poor thing. I wonder how he came up here. Trevor looked around, in case someone was searching for the dog. Let's keep him. Jane's eyes shone with excitement. It'll be a real adventure. Keep him? Where? We can't take him to our cabin. No, but there's plenty of places on board. How about the lifeboat? Everyone will hear him when he barks. But imagine, Trevor, he will be our story. Our real adventure. Looking after a stowaway dog. But he doesn't want to. We're forcing him. Trevor looked at her indignantly. We can't keep him. We can keep him. He can be your pet, Jane urged him. You name him. Go on. Tommy, Trevor said. Jane rolled her eyes. Something better. Okay. It's hard to think of a name so quickly. Trevor studied the dog. Bindi, he said. Bindi? Yes, look. He has a bindi on his forehead. See that white dot? Just like Arya's bindi. only hers is a big red dot. Woof! He likes it, laughed Trevor. Bindi! Listen, Trevor. Jane rubbed her hands together. Let's get him some food and water and look for a place to hide him. Where shall we hide him? Or get food from? Trevor asked. I'll go to the galley, Jane volunteered. I'll pretend I'm very hungry. If I'm questioned, you keep him here. Jane ran off while Trevor waited with Bindi on the deck. Jane skulked round to the galley. There was some rice in a bowl and leftovers from Sunday lamb roast. Perfect, cried Jane. She wrapped the food in newspapers and made her way back to the forecastle. Here you are, Trev, she smiled. I did it, without getting caught. Now let's hide him somewhere. They walked round the forecastle, looking into spaces and niches. Look, said Trevor, there's a door. They opened it. It was a storage space with coils of rope heaped in piles. Perfect, said Jane, peeping in. There's enough space for Bindi. Trevor looked worried. Jane, I don't think Bindi will like being locked up like that. Why don't we let him go? Jane pulled her face. Trevor, don't be such a scaredy cat. Bindi will have fun. We'll lock him up only till we set sail. Then we'll set him free. One cannot do anything to him once we're sailing. Can't throw him overboard. We'll volunteer to keep him. Are you sure, Jane? Yeah. He'll have to bear it only for a few hours, and anyway, he'll have loads to eat and drink in his spare time, she said. They locked Bindi in the small room. Bindi whined and scratched on the door. Trevor and Jane held back, listening. Would he settle in? Jane peeped through the porthole. Bindi finally retired inside and began gnawing at the bone. Jane smiled. He'd be occupied for a while now. They raced back to their cabin, and just in time. Captain Ridgely looked in to say that they were setting sail soon. They could go up to his room to get a better look, if they liked. Soon the steamship floated away from the jetty. We're sailing, Jane grinned. We're on our way to Bombay. I hope Bindi's all right. Trevor looked worried. What if he's been discovered? But no one mentioned any dog when they went down to have dinner. Trevor drew circles on his plate and thought of poor Bindi, all alone in that room, confused and frightened. Suddenly, the ship rocked as if it had been rammed into a stone wall. The glasses and cutlery flew from the table. A tray of empty plates crashed to the floor. What's happening? Shouted Jane. No, the messman replied. It's the storm. The nor'westers are upon us. The ship rolled wildly. The children were instructed to return to their cabin. It was dark, and the view was obscured by lashing rain. They pressed their noses to the window pane and watched the foaming waters flood onto the deck. The wind screamed through the rigging, and the ship groaned with every beating it received from the storm. Trevor's stomach lurched. He stared at Jane, who looked white as a sheet herself. The poor dog must be scared to death, he whispered. Jane bit her lip. But what can we do? We've got to save him. We could get thrown out and be injured, and it'd be our fault. Jane's eyes flashed. How will we know what was going to happen? Of course we didn't. But we shouldn't have kept him on board. It's against the rule. Trevor, Jane shouted. You're talking as if I forced the dog to stay. You wanted him just as much. No, Trevor shouted back. I did not. You forced him to stay. You named him, Jane said and turned away. He's yours. Trevor couldn't believe it. Not only had she imprisoned the dog, but now she also denied it. I don't know about you, Jane, he said finally, but I'm going to get Bindi here. Jane flew at him. You can't go out in this terrible weather. Have patience. The storm will go as quickly as it came. Trevor shook his head. Not at the risk of Bindi dying out there. He raced to the door with Jane following behind. Jane, help me open the door, he commanded. Jane looked at him, fear in her eyes. Look, Trevor, maybe we can get some help. No, it's too late. It's my fault for agreeing to such a stupid plan. Jane bit her lip till she drew blood. She watched him struggle with the heavy door. Then she ran up the stairs. I'm going to tell Father, she panted. Trevor hung onto the latch with all his weight till it gave way. The wind was battering the sides of the ship. He braced himself against the elements and stepped out onto the deck. The sky was black, with sudden rips of lightning tearing the sky open. The rain was icy cold and stinging, and it lashed furiously against him. Trevor crawled in the ground, slipping and sliding as the ship rolled. The forecastle was not far off, but it seemed like the longest distance he'd covered in his entire life. He held onto the pipes running the length of the deck and inched forward. He finally reached the forecastle storeroom. He unlatched the door and threw himself inside. It was pitch black. Where was Bindi? He whistled and called out. Suddenly a shape threw itself on the boy. It was Bindi, barking with delight. Hey, boy, laughed Trevor, hugging Bindi. You're alive! You're a hero! The dog licked Trevor and pawed him and scratched him excitedly. Let's get out of here, Trevor shouted and reached for a rope. He tied it to his waist and also around Bindi's middle. Then he guided Bindi to move along the pipe he had held onto on his way to the forecastle. As they struggled forward, Trevor spotted lights coming their way. There was a lot of shouting. Someone was calling his name. It was Father. Trevor cried out, but his voice was drowned in the screaming wind. He felt strong arms lifting him up. He clung to his father's chest as he was carried back onto the quarterdeck. Bindi! Bindi! He kept calling. The dog's safe, Trevor. Soon he was in his cabin, feet soaked in hot water and a towel wrapped around him. Jane was holding a mug of steaming cocoa in front of his nose. Bindi lay on a rug, whimpering. His father was pacing the room. He had a frown on his face, but his lips were not set in a thin line. Jane had told her father what had happened, and he'd immediately set out with a search party to go look for his son. The storm vanished as quickly as it came. The moon was up and the waters calmed down. Tiny lights flickered in the distance. Captain Ridgely frowned at his children. I'm very disappointed that you two disobeyed me and did something very dangerous. Animals are not allowed on this ship. That dog shouldn't have been here in the first place. I'm sorry, sir, Jane said. I'm at fault. You can punish me. Trevor was against it. Captain Ridgely nodded and then turned to his son. And you, young man? What made you think you could become a hero of the hour and go out into the most dangerous of situations? I'm sorry, sir. Trevor looked down. But I didn't have a choice. I was involved in keeping this dog on board, and I didn't want him to die. I had to rescue him. Captain Ridgely smiled. He patted Trevor on the back. You are a fine boy, he said. Trevor looked up at his father and saw pride in his eyes. Trevor squared his shoulders and looked at Bindi, who returned his gaze with loving eyes. But rules are rules, the captain said. That dog has to disembark at Diamond Harbour. Oh, so they were going to lose Bindi after all. Captain Ridgely opened the door, and without turning around, he spoke. I'll have someone look after Bindi till we return to the hooey. Then we'll pick him up, and you can have him. Take him home, Trevor. He's yours, and you deserve to have him." "Oh, Father!" Trevor and Jane squealed with joy. Trevor jumped up to hug Bindi. He buried his face in Bindi's coarse fur. "I love you, Bindi," Trevor whispered, and Bindi licked Trevor's nose in return.